Good afternoon. Really happy to be here today talking about something I'm very, very interested in. Talking about identity, the application of AI to identity, but of course, before we get going, we really have to take a step back and talk about this whole concept of identity and how we define it. And no doubt today you've already heard some definitions of identity. But it's really easy to think, well, that's a person or that's a device. And sure, it can be, but it's also so much more. So to understand identity, we need data. Where can that data come from? Well, you can see that down here. Your daily business operations are a goldmine of data. And all of the likely suspects are there. Devices, for sure. We've got users, people, yes. Equipment, think of OT environments. We've got cloud, you name it, it's there. If we can extract this data, we're starting to build up an idea of an identity. It could be a person, could be a device, it could be the business itself. Now this becomes really, really powerful because what does it let us do? It lets us understand what something is and what they should be doing. So, understand the different levels of identity. We can look at an individual, user, device. We can also look at what we call peer groups. So for example, I work in the HR department. What do other people in the HR department do? I have a database server. What do other database servers in that organization do? And then you can go one step higher. Forget about the individual, forget about the peer groups. What about the organization as a whole? If we're talking about unusual outbound internet connections, has anybody or any device in this organization ever contacted that weird suspicious IP address that we're looking at? So you can see that we need more context than just the individual level. Individual alert, individual log, individual user or device. We need context. So we have to correlate all of this together. And the good news is if you can correlate and you can get that context and build up an understanding of who somebody is, what they should be doing, well, you can now start to respond in a very intelligent manner. For example, network. We see an unusual connection from a user out to some weird suspicious IP address. If we know that that is unusual for that user, what we can do is very powerful. We can block that connection, but only that connection, and allow everything else that that user is doing that is normal to continue. So this is not like the days of yesterday where we see anything suspicious and we automatically block or quarantine and bring down business operations. Users are affected, machines are affected, systems come down. That hurts business productivity. So we want to keep the business up and running, but we want to keep it secure. If we're talking about email, we might see an email come in. Everything looks okay, except this one link. There's a strange link. We're not too sure about that. Well, let's strip out the link. Allow the email through, allow it to be read. It may be legitimate, but we take out that source of potential malicious activity. If we're talking about users accessing SaaS services, we can actually log them off if we see activity we don't like. We can lock their account if they keep getting back in. We can detach cloud profiles in infrastructure as a service environments. There is so much that we can do if we understand who or what somebody is and what they should be doing. So let's talk about the threat landscape as it applies to AI. A couple of things are changing here. Hopefully some of this is familiar, but let's take it step by step. We know malware groups are creating environments where they can actually sell their wares. You can pay very, very cheap prices, buy everything you need to go and launch your own attacks with a dedicated graphical user interface, customer support. You point and click and you're attacking somebody. It has become that simple to go out and become an attacker today. That means that they are collecting money. It's a market. You pay the money. That goes into R&D, innovation. The attacks get more sophisticated. So we see that happening. We also see an appetite for increased interconnectivity. So businesses go out, they make their IT purchasing decisions, and one of the things they're asking for is, look, it needs to be able to do everything we want it to do, but it also needs to talk to everything else we have in our IT stack, interconnectivity. Now that's great for productivity, it's great for efficiency. It also means we are increasing our attack surface. So it's something we need to be aware of. And at the same time, we see that there is greater scale. Using AI, the attackers can do more. They can do it faster. They can be more powerful, more creative, if you like. And most people are already seeing AI-powered attacks in their environment. So something to think about. Now, what are we seeing? This is what can happen. What are we actually seeing happening? Let's run the numbers. Forget about the bottom. We all understand generative AI. It's been around for a year or two now. I want to focus on the top here, the abuse of trust. When we talk about identity, if you can assume somebody's identity that is not yours, you are now abusing trust that somebody else has in that identity. So email account takeovers, as an example. If you can masquerade as somebody that might have an existing relationship with another third party, you can abuse that trusted relationship and launch your attack as that trusted person. We see this all the time. Massive increase in these sorts of attacks. We also see a large increase in attacks where the IT team is being impersonated. Now think about this. If you're getting an email from the IT team saying that we need to reset your passwords, we need to log you in, set up an account for you, here's a QR code, go and scan it. If that's done well, there's a high chance you're going to scan that QR code. We see this all the time. So this is abusing trust, again, down to identity and relationships. What does this mean? It affects what we call the 3 Vs. You can see them here: velocity, volume, and variety. Volume, more attacks. Velocity, faster. They're coming out faster. It used to take a lot of time to manually go out, understand what we can do, what we can learn about somebody, craft a phishing email, send it out. It's automated now. It takes milliseconds. And variety. Not every attack is the same. It is bespoke, written, custom generated for the individual. So we have, as an organization, increased costs trying to keep ourselves secure. We have a higher security risk, goes without saying. At the same time, in today's environment, we have less resources. We have reduced people manning the SOC and the IT team, the security team. It leads to a perfect storm, as you might imagine. So, what do we do? How can we leverage AI to counter the problems that this is all creating? And this is where it gets really interesting. Now, as you go around and you talk to vendors and you evaluate solutions, today you're going to hear a lot about AI, and that's wonderful. It brings so many benefits. I would encourage you to dive deep and ask about what AI is being leveraged. There's no such thing as just AI. There are different types and they serve different purposes. They have their own strengths and weaknesses. And you need to understand what AI is being used for what reasons. So ask the questions. Here are a couple of examples. At the top, I'm not going to go through all of these. At the top, we have unsupervised machine learning. Now, this is a big part of what we do at Darktrace. Typical machine learning requires data sets to be scrubbed, cleaned. It needs to be put into classifications. And once the humans have classified it, then it gets fed through the machine learning algorithms. Unsupervised machine learning is exactly the opposite. You feed it the raw data. You don't consume time manipulating all of that data. You don't involve humans. It takes it in. It understands. It does the hard learning by itself. Really, really valuable. We also have, as you can see here, deep learning engine. And this is what we did a couple of years back. Being a benefit of an AI company, we can use AI internally on our own staff. And that's exactly what we did. We have our own SOC analysts. And we, for a period of 2 to 2.5 years, looked at exactly what they were doing in the SOC. An event comes in. How do they investigate it? What does their workflow look like? What hypotheses were they making? How did they put that to the test? How did they resolve the tickets? And that led to an automated way of triaging and responding to incidents, which is really, really powerful. So deep learning is fantastic. We have another one here, graph theory, which I love. Graph theory is all about building out, mapping the relationships between users or devices and other users and devices. So I use my laptop, which connects to somebody else's machine. If I was an attacker and I compromised my laptop, how many steps or hops would it take to get to the data that I really wanted to get out of that company? Maybe it's the CEO's laptop. Maybe it's something in the data center. It's understanding those relationships and how that network looks. So some really powerful stuff going on here. And going back to what I was saying earlier, talking about AI, understanding AI, here's a list of some questions you can go and ask. And I'd really encourage you to ask a lot of these questions. Let's go through some of them. The first one here, what are the strengths and limitations of this approach? You really have to understand, what is the problem we're setting out to achieve? Is it an email solution? Is it a network? Is it an endpoint or cloud? What sort of AI are you using? What's the reason? Why are you choosing that specific type of AI? The models are really important too. A lot of, especially traditional AI machine learning, is done by a period of learning. We put something in place, we let it run, maybe it's 4 weeks, maybe it's 6 months, and we come up with what we call a baseline. And then going forward, anything that conforms to the baseline, that's fine, we accept that, it's normal. Anything that's different, we say, okay, that's anomalous. But the problem is that baseline never moves, it never evolves. And we know that every single day in the organization, we are evolving, things are different. It's a very dynamic environment. Users do different things every single day. So we need to be updating that idea of that trained or learnt environment. So that's interesting. We've also got, you can see under training data here, what measures does the vendor take to make sure that the training they're giving you, the models, the learning, is intact. It's not tampered with. It's not contaminated. That's really, really important if you want to be relying on these findings or these incidents. And then, of course, transparency. And this is a big one. With transparency, does the vendor explain the AI? Do they give you scores between 0 to 100? How important is this? How confident are we of what we're telling you? A lot of AI, even today, is still very much a black box. You feed it data, it does some learning, and then it gives you an answer. But you have no idea how it came to that answer. So that's really interesting. In the same vein, can a human, can a person working in your SOC interact with the AI? Can they see how these algorithms are put together? Can they tune it if they have specific needs? Can they create specific bespoke models for themselves? If they can do that, they can get more value out of it. And lastly, where is this data stored? Are we sending stuff up to the cloud? Do we have control of it? Is it inside our country? Or can we bring it down on-prem and run it as our own so we don't need to send any information outbound? Some interesting questions to think about there. Now, I want to get into a couple of case studies. We've talked about what we're up against. We've talked about what we can do about it. But let's see some real stories of this actually happening. And this is comes out of some of our customer environments, sanitized, anonymized, of course, but some interesting findings. So let's talk about Log4j. This goes back a while, a year or two, but it's really, really interesting. The story I like, it is a story, it's a narrative. So we saw in 2 of our customer environments at pretty much the same time, inbound HTTPS connections. Now these were a bit weird because they were coming into a DMZ server from what we call a rare Russian IP address. Now rare means that for this organization, that IP address has never communicated with us before. So a little bit strange. And we're not saying it's strange because it's Russian. We're saying it's strange because we've never seen it before. So that's not going to say it's an incident. It's just going to say, okay, interesting. But then we start seeing more information. So this DMZ server now makes some outbound connections. And it makes more than one to that same weird, rare IP address using 2 different user agents. One is a Java user agent. And this is weird because this web server has never, DMZ server has never used a Java agent to make an outbound connection. And the other one is a HTTP, curl over HTTP. And again, rare, never seen before. This is getting really suspicious. Now, at the same time, or shortly after, we see this DMZ server using an HTTP connection back to another agent with the same information, and it's got reconnaissance information. Information is now leaving the organization. Okay, we want to stop this. This is getting bad. An hour and a half later, we actually see that DMZ server downloading scripts and executables, which is the start of a ransomware operation. Now, if you think about it, you can actually see the scripts and executables being downloaded there. Why would a DMZ server be downloading scripts and executables from the internet? This is looking really, really suspicious. DMZ servers don't do this. We don't hard code that knowledge into our systems, we learn it. We have learned from observation in these environments, these specific servers have never downloaded anything like this at all. We've also seen all of the other behavior that's really, really strange. So we step in and we stop it. And what that looks like is up here. It might be a little bit hard to read, but we are blocking connections to that rare IP address for a period of, in this case, 2 hours. Now that gives the security team time to go in, see what's wrong, put a fix in place, and if that activity is still happening, we're going to extend that 2-hour window. Again, balancing productivity and business security. So that's one story. Here's another story I want to close out with. And it's a living off the land story. This was actually not the start of the attack. This was midway through an attack. We saw something in a customer environment, things were looking bad, and then there was a period where the attacker wanted to go covert. They wanted to hide their tracks, remain stealthy, not bring any attention to themselves. So what they did was they downloaded a Hydra agent, and Hydra is a password cracking tool, via BitTorrent. BitTorrent was already on the endpoint that they infected. Don't know why, it doesn't meet organizational security policy, but it was there. And they leveraged it to download something and then begin using it. Now, what we could see by the context and by the correlation was that there was a new user agent, that's one of our alerts that we surfaced, and this was the Hydra HTTP request. We'd never seen Hydra in that environment. It was calling out to something on the internet, making an outbound connection. That in itself was unusual and rare. But there's more. We also saw that Hydra agent downloading a zip or a gzip file from a place out on the internet that nothing, no user, no device in this environment had ever gone out and communicated with before. So you can imagine how this is looking. It's looking pretty suspicious. And that's exactly what we're looking at it as. But then 2 days later, we're also seeing some really suspicious administrator privileges being misused. And again, living off the land, the administrator accounts already existed, but they're being used in a very unusual manner. We're seeing some really weird SMB sessions, connections to file servers. We're seeing some RPC, remote procedure calls. I'm on one machine, but I'm calling a process or a service on another machine using these administrator rights that somehow I've got, probably from the Hydra cracking tool. And then you can see all sorts of other things taking place. AT server scheduled tasks. We're setting up scheduled tasks to run at really weird times, doing some really weird things. None of this we've actually seen in this customer environment. So you can see, no matter what it is, if it's something that violates our concept of identity, our concept of normal, what we expect to see, what we don't, then regardless of whether we've got threat intelligence, regardless of whether we've got signatures, we'll be able to catch that anomalous behavior based on its behavior, all coming back to this concept of identity. With that, I want to thank you, make way for the next speech. Thank you very much.